Go. Okay.
There we go. All right. Well, thanks, Ross.
Yes.
Any questions from board members?
Yeah, I have a question for Ross. This is a pretty ambitious program, so congratulations on that. It looks like you've got, what, 7 major functions and then all those questions. Are you the only one that's going to be monitoring all of this stuff?
Well, it's a great question. Yes and no. Not all those things will be happening at once. Those were all of the major areas we could think of that might have sort of opportunity for me to be involved. The work plan that we have for the next 2 years, or really we're almost into a year and a half now of remaining time, we'll chip away at some of those areas. And the other concept that we're going to make sure is implemented is that some of these, let's say the tracking and the integration of some sustainability considerations will be divided out across various other staffs. So, and Jason may chime in here. This will be something that will get sort of added to the punch list, added to the checks list of items for project management, for example. Have you considered this? What about the total cost of ownership, or what have you, those kinds of aspects that are currently not on that list, so that I wouldn't have to bird dog all of it. But in terms of the end of the day, who's gathering the data and rolling it up into the city's sustainability report and ultimately our sustainability plan, that's my role.
Brian?
Sure. Hi, Ross. I have a question about the PSC 20-year contract.
Yes.
That was, was that just entered into recently?
Well, it became live the last couple months. We actually began the process, I believe, about 3 years ago.
Okay.
So
a fixed rate contract over 20 years?
Yeah. So what they do is all of the cost of the green power has a set price schedule for 20 years, and is only adjusted a small fraction each year at a predictable amount. So that's already been fixed for each year.
Yeah, so my only question would be, and Tom, you might want to weigh in given your background, I don't know, but as the price of renewables decline or are expected to decline over time, as the efficiency increases, it just seems like that would be factored into the pricing over the 20 years so that we're not towards the end of the contract paying rates that are well in excess of the cost of generating green power. And it'd be interesting to know how that is or is not factored into that contract.
Yeah, one of the ways that it was evaluated was looking at over the last 5, 10, 20 years of conventional power, looking at what rates historically have done over time. And so for conventional power, those rates have not gone down. Historically they go up. So the starting point for the green power was initially conceived as being at about par, but then because the project was delayed a few years, they actually received a sort of compensation from the developer that lowered the rate even further. So even the day we started with the green power contract, and now we have a few months of billing, we can look at this. But the day we started, we actually began at the power portion of the bill at a slightly lower rate than conventional power. And then it is on a very, very gradual schedule, which is a lower angle curve than historic conventional power increases at.
Okay. I can chime in on that a little bit as well, being a former PSE employee. Is part of the cost of that delivered energy is in transmission, and PSE relies specifically in that part of the state on Bonneville Power transmission to get it over here to the load area. And BPA rates, to my knowledge, haven't gone down in at least 20 years. They may have no increase over a 2-year period, but by and large it goes up quite a bit. And even though transmission is a relatively small portion of the price of delivered power, it is one of those things that's increasing over time.
Well, I kind of knew the answer to the question when I posed it, but I think it's important to have our eyes open that these green energy programs, there's a component that, you know, the reality is that PSC is also in the process of phasing out its coal generation in Montana and other places, and there are some stranded costs and you know, rehabilitation costs, for lack of a better term, for cleanup costs associated with coal facilities.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be important to know the extent to which any of that is perhaps factored into the pricing, which is one of the reasons that prices continue to grow slightly over time rather than go down as we would expect with renewables in a new environment. I don't expect you to know the answer to that, Ross, but I think it's a reality, I guess, of these kinds of programs at this point in time, given that the state has moved in that direction.
Yeah, yeah. I can add that PSC was very interested in rolling this product out a few years ago and starting with large, reliable customers like government and large institutions, universities, et cetera, to kind of proof of concept. And also because of the state mandate that was coming down the road that they needed to get a lot of people shifted over. And this was a way to you know, pull in a number of investors essentially, and then with those commitments able to build that wind farm from scratch. So that was their business case, if you like, that they wanted to make sure this could work, and in the future they may do this again with smaller purchasers. But right now we're in pretty good company with some very large customers.
Any other questions? I have one if no one else has any. Ross, on your list, your slide with the sustainability lens
Yes.
considerations, and you talked about this a little bit, but I just want to make sure. So is this not going to be a checklist that accompanies every decision that the city makes, that you need to go through this checklist to make sure you've considered all these things, and then that data is compiled? Because I know how difficult it can be to, and we run across this in Seattle, you know, a women in small business, minority businesses has a checklist, and we have environmental justice checklists. But if you don't require it for every you know, obviously there's a cutoff, then a lot of times it doesn't get done. So how do you envision that sustainability lens being used to evaluate projects going forward?
Well, I don't know if Jason, you want to kick off the answer to this, but or I can. Looks like I will. Oh, there he is.
Go ahead, Ross. You can kick off the answer.
Okay.
There's Lisa joining us.
Oh, great. Yeah, so it's a little bit of both, Tom, that I don't think every question will be applicable to every project. And, you know, the intention isn't to have an exhaustive list of 100 questions that every project has to go through, because then you're sort of losing efficiency by doing that. But the idea is that some of these selected high points, and we'll figure out what makes sense to fit where, would be inserted into the existing workflow for project managers and for CIP project managers, where there's already a pretty established set and timeline of events and sequence that needs to happen. And now we're going to get some additional considerations into that existing process.
Brian, is your hand a new hand, or? Just one last question on, is there any idea, I mean, a lot of these things are small things and some are big things. Any idea of the cost of implementing all these various ideas that you had on all your slides to both the city government as well as to the community?
Well, I don't have a ballpark cost. And, you know, a lot of times in the sustainability world, there's, especially right now, there's grant money from the state or from the federal government to to local governments to be those early adopters and kind of model that behavior that they're trying to get more broadly dispersed. So there's often opportunities to mitigate sometimes a larger upfront cost with that grant assistance. Quite often programs will pay for themselves, especially when you have a commodity involved. Let's say in the recycling world, for example, if you can get everyone to do a better job, then you have a cleaner product and that sells for more. So sometimes it might just be outreach and education. And then other times, maybe an improvement in workflow results in a lot fewer vehicle miles traveled by staff. Or let's say post-COVID, staff are able to use vehicles together again, and you try not to be sending out single drivers to go do something. You try to build it into a route that's maybe already existing. Sometimes it's just process improvements like that could have a cost benefit, and at the same time not cost a lot of or any resources to implement beyond my elbow grease, if you like.
Okay, thanks, Ross. Any other questions, council member? I don't know if you probably didn't hear any of it, but.
Well, I was told that the presentation would be similar to what had already been presented to council, so I think I'm good. Thank you very much. I was feeling a little guilty about missing this part of the presentation, then I remembered that, so I'm okay.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, Ross. I know you got to run off to another meeting, so we'll let you move on to your next Zoom call.
Okay, absolutely. Well, I'm happy to have this opportunity, and I'm sure we'll be circling back at other times with probably updates on specific subsets rather than this large umbrella, and we'll highlight some examples as they roll out.
Thank you. All right. Next item is the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Annual Report. I guess we'll kick this off to Jason for an intro.
Absolutely. You got the tongue twister right. So +1 for Vice Chair to board tonight. So as you can see, there's a number of staff on this phone call or this Zoom meeting tonight. And I think it is important that you have some FaceTime with all the staff members involved in this call, because the NPDES report touches many different hands within our organization. It is a very broad program that touches operations and capital. Ross, who's actually getting off the phone, actually has a piece of this as well. And so tonight, I'm going to pass it to Patrick to do the broad introduction, but each member of this screen will have a slide or two to talk about their specific function and role in the NPDES report. This is an annual requirement as part of our stormwater permit that we have. We have an annual reporting requirement that is due each March of every year, and the Department of Ecology performs an audit annually of this report and make sure that we are held accountable to our stormwater regulations and stormwater and management plan. So Patrick, I will pass it to you for further introduction.
Thank you, Jason. Good evening, Mr. Vice Chair, board members, and Council Member Anderall. I'm Patrick Yamashita, the City Engineer and Deputy Public Works Director over Capital Projects and Engineering. I'd like to start with some staff introductions since you see so many faces on your screen. Each person is going to be involved in the presentation. I'd like to start with introducing Elaine Sommergren. Maybe you could just say hi and wave so people can see your face. I think she's working on the slideshow. After Elaine, Brian Hartvickson. Brian is the right-of-way and stormwater manager. Say hi, Brian. Maybe there's no highs. And then next is Hannah Van Pelt. Hannah is our stormwater technician up in Public Works. And then Chris Kelly. Chris Kelly is our stormwater lead in operations and maintenance. Fred Gu is our capital projects manager. And then Ruji Ding is our senior development review engineer. And so if you look at our first slide, it provides a little bit of an outline of what we're going to be talking about. Brian is going to kick things off by talking about what NPDES is. And then Hannah will talk about what NPDES requires of us as a city. And then Chris will talk about what NPDES looks like from an operations and maintenance perspective. And then he'll hand off to Fred, who will talk about how some capital projects are related to NPDES. And then Ruji will talk about different ways that we require mitigation for stormwater impacts caused by private development. And then Elaine will wrap things up with our presentation, and then we'll lead into a time of question and discussion, question and answer. However, if you have questions during the presentation, feel free to chime in and just ask your question. And with that, I'd love to hand off to Brian.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to start off with what is NPDES. It stands for the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. And it's really what regulates stormwater quality under the city's Western Washington Phase 2 Municipal Stormwater Permit. The Phase 2 means that it's for cities that were under 100,000 in base population. The program was initially phased in, so the larger cities were Phase 1 cities, and they got to blaze the trail, and we came in after. This all stems from the Clean Water Act of 1972, and the requirements were published by the Environmental Protection Agency in 1999, after it was evident that a lot of our waterway pollution was actually sourced from surface stormwater carrying pollution such as oil sheens and fertilizers, pesticides. It was transporting those directly into the larger bodies of water. So with that, the system aims to help us investigate two main sources of pollution, two main types. One is a point source, and one that we've experienced on the maintenance and operations side frequently is like a painting crew at a homeowner's residence. They're doing like external painting, and their painting crew would clean out their brushes and their spraying equipment, and they would drain it directly into a catch basin. We would either find it internally or get a report that there's paint running through the stormwater ravines, and we would find the source. And when we find the actual source, we tend to just give education. Oftentimes people think that as they dump things into the catch basin, it's treated, and that's just not the case. It goes directly into our lake when you're within Mercer Island. So once you educate people, they're oftentimes surprised, and it helps alleviate that behavior in the future. The other type is a non-point source, and that's more difficult to actually pinpoint where it's coming from. It might just be general pollution caused from fertilizer runoff from several sites within a drainage basin. And when we get issues like that, we have to do more investigation to find the source or sources. And we have both a reactive and a proactive approach to these items. Reactive is when we notice that there's a point source pollution going on, we respond to the spill or the issue and educate and clean up the issue immediately. This could be reported by residents as well. And then we have a proactive approach where we're measuring from outfalls that are indicative of certain drainage basins. And we'll look for any indications of pollution there and try and trace back the source from that point, and then look to resolve that pollution source. So the NPDES permit is actually administered by the Department of Ecology, and it requires the city, as a city with a MS4, which actually stands for a Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, to annually report our compliance in 8 comprehensive permit components. It's actually due every March 31st, and we just submitted ours recently. And among those components, you can see that they're pretty comprehensive, and they actually involve people from several departments here at the city. And that's why we're doing this presentation, just to show how many hands it takes to actually administer this program. So next up, Hannah will dive more into these components.
Good evening. I think Brian was right. Comprehensive is the best word probably to describe this permit. It certainly requires a lot of the jurisdictions, but it actually also provides a very effective framework for managing a stormwater program. As you can see, we've got the 8 components up on the slide there for you. There's stormwater planning, sort of big picture, how we manage our infrastructure and our catchment areas, and how that impacts the health of the receiving water bodies, i.e. Lake Washington, and how we can improve our management to improve ultimately the health of the water. The education and outreach is pretty self-explanatory. It incorporates many avenues of general education for the community, as well as what's called a behavior change campaign. This is actually a multi-year initiative in which we select one best management practice, or BMP, to focus on, and through a sort of a suite of marketing and outreach methods, we aim to educate and hopefully enact some change in how the community impacts water quality themselves. There's also a public involvement and participation element, which you all probably know a little something about. It aims to engage the community in planning and decision-making efforts, as well as interact through volunteer events or special roles. The MS4, which is, again, encompasses the entire city's stormwater infrastructure. The mapping and documentation standards that are established by this permit are pretty high. There's goals for data collection, as well as mapping of our assets, of our infrastructure, as well as sort of a landscape view of the island, the catchment basins or drainage basins, and sort of how the topography affects our management of stormwater system and activities. Brian already touched on the illicit discharge detection and elimination program, which essentially is how we receive, respond, and report pollution, discharges, spills, or even illicit connections, cross connections, say with the sewer lines or something like that, to our storm system. Depending on the severity, we have to report to ecology or just handle ourselves. But let's see, number 6, controlling runoff from new development, redevelopment, and construction sites. That establishes the minimum standards for development on the island, which is reflected in our city code. It establishes standards, as well as a schedule for reevaluating and constantly, always checking up and making sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that new development is to the best of the industry standards, basically. The 7th component is a big one, municipal operations and maintenance. And that encompasses all of the activities involved with managing our infrastructure. That includes inspection thresholds, maintenance methods, and timelines. Chris will tell you a little bit more about that. And the last component is the source control program for existing development. Typo. Oh no. The name is a little confusing, but this is a new element on the permit, which we are just now starting to develop and will be implementing in the coming years, 2 or 3 years. It's a pretty big one, actually. It's an inventory and inspection program for all of our potential polluters, essentially, beyond like single family homes. This really includes all of the businesses and multi-living facilities like condominiums, senior living facilities and whatnot. All of those businesses and such on the island are going to be held to a set of higher standards of those BMP's best management practices that we will establish through the city code and have yearly inspections.
Hey, Hannah, can I, a quick question?
Yeah.
And maybe if this is covered later, just let me know. On the illicit discharge detection, is that all just visual and both with city crews and people just reporting, or is there a regular testing of water somewhere in places?
It's both. So a lot of the reports are just from people out on the streets and other businesses, like Recology, for instance, is always communicating with us about spills and things. But it's also something that is looked out for and even sometimes caught with our catch basin and outfall inspections. So there are a lot of visual cues that may then instigate further investigation, say bubbles or toilet paper or some, things like that, things that are an oily sheen in the water in the bottom of the catch basin may lead us to then do other investigations, water quality testing, dye testing, where we run dye through the line to see if there's a cross connection somewhere, or but there's a few different methods that we can get those. So
okay.
it is caught with with our inspections, as well as just happening upon a spill on the street or something.
Right.
So what does all this require of us as far as deliverables? Like Brian said, once a year we submit an annual report that details everything that we did the previous year and how we complied with the various requirements, as well as submit an update to our stormwater management program plan, the SWIMP plan, that details all of the activities we have planned for the coming year. Both of those can be found on the city website. I have a link there in the slide. You can check it out anytime. We welcome input always on our development of these things. And then I also just wanted to touch on a few of the bigger things that are on the horizon for us. I mentioned the stormwater planning, sort of big picture. Next year we will be submitting a watershed, an inventory of our catchment areas, ranked based on condition, and then in 2023 we will develop a stormwater management action plan for at least one of the high priority catchment areas that were identified in that inventory from the previous year. The behavior change campaign I mentioned, that's a multi-year program which has already is just now kicking off in spring of 2021. We have selected proper pet waste cleanup and disposal, since the city is mostly residential and we've got so many park and recreation areas. It's very appropriate for the island. The source control program that I mentioned, the inventory and inspection program with enforcement measures, that it has implementation and code updates within 2023. And lastly, the stormwater pollution prevention plans. These are required for all of our facilities, our large sort of heavy equipment yards and storage yards. Those need to be updated in 2022 for every facility. Let's see, next slide, please. I wanted to give you a snapshot sort of what we're working with our whole infrastructure. Basically, we've got over 5,400 catch basins on the island, which all of them have to be inspected every 2 years, which is a big undertaking. With that, we've got approximately 300,000 feet of storm drain lines connecting those catch basins. This is not a requirement per se of the permit, but in order to achieve our maintenance goals, we would really like to establish a 6-year cycle for jetting and camera and videoing all of the storm lines every 6 years. We've got 339 outfalls at the lake. That's where all of the storm water and everything drains down, eventually ends up, of course, at the lake. These outfalls must be a minimum inspection of 12% per year, and that's done more of on a drainage basin framework. And those are inspected not just for the condition of the actual outfalls, the structure, but also we do water quality testing when there is flow present. And lastly, the stormwater facilities. We've got, I mentioned, 4 heavy equipment maintenance and storage yards, which each have their own management plans and are inspected twice a year. And at least 25 and always growing stormwater treatment or flow control facilities, or BMPs is what they call it. But basically that's, our trash racks, our detention ponds, those sort of smaller structures that play an important role. Those are inspected at least annually, but also spot checked after every big storm event, just to make sure everything's functioning properly. So, to tell you a little bit more about that, that was Chris Kelly. He's our stormwater lead out in the field.
Good evening. Hello, everyone. As Hannah mentioned, I'm Chris. I am the stormwater crew lead, and I work on the right-of-way team. So Brian is my manager, and I work with Hannah quite a bit. And we're just going to talk about how we try to maintain all the infrastructure that Hannah just told you about. As she mentioned, we do have a lot of catch basins and a lot of storm mains that we have to inspect every year. As part of this permit, one of the requirements is once we do identify an issue, or a trouble spot, we have about 6 months to address that issue and do our best to mitigate, repair, or replace whatever we need to. As part of just our regular maintenance and reactive maintenance, we employ the use of a Vector truck, which is just a really powerful vacuum attached to a truck. And we use that to suck out catch basins. It also has a jet hose on it with usually 300 to 400 feet of length, so it can shoot down a storm lane or a storm main pipe and clean it out. And then once you get that pipe clean, you can then put a camera in and inspect it. And that's our ultimate goal, is, you know, trying to figure out what we're working with, so we know what areas we need to focus on. Just as a side note, we changed it up in 2020, and with our Vector costs, we were able to reduce about 30% of that, because we had a targeted approach based upon the inspections that are part of this permit requirement. So rather than just taking a blanket section of our infrastructure and throwing the equipment at it, we were able to target areas that specifically we knew needed help. So that was an efficiency that this permit actually was able to help us realize.
Hey, Chris, quick question on the Vector
Sure.
truck. Where do you put the discharge, the Vector?
We actually have a dedicated facility for that. So it's an engineered system that we are able to decant. Basically, what that means is we drain as much liquid as we can out of the Vector truck into a special basin that then eventually filters into the sanitary sewer. And that is part of our King County contract. We pay them, you know, whatever it is that we use for that. And then the solids are dumped out on a very large concrete pad that is undercover and slowly drains, and whatever liquid drains out of those solids then also ends up in King County sanitary sewer, and whatever solids are left over are then dried out, turned over, and eventually hauled away. So that way we're doing our best to basically clean that material, and all the pollutants and all the poisons end up in the sanitary sewer.
Thanks.
Yep, you bet. Moving on to vegetation control. So this is where we do a lot of brushing. This is the time of year it really starts to step up because everything's in bloom. But this is in relation to our open ditch conveyance system. So this includes utilizing heavy equipment, brusher, a mower, and ditch cleaning, culvert cleaning, and sometimes reshaping. That keeps our open ditch conveyance system running smoothly. Street sweeping is also an important factor that helps keep a lot of things out of our system. Is everything, when it gets on the street, eventually after it rains, it runs right into the storm drain. So street sweeping on a regular basis is a very important part. Storm event response. This is when we all know we have some real doozies that hit the island sometimes, and we get some surges. So we try to monitor hotspots, areas that we know can be overwhelmed at times and tend to flood. So we do our best to keep those areas clean of any debris. We check them on a regular basis, especially when we know a storm is coming or is in progress. That takes quite a bit of staff time. Fortunately, only during the storm or right before. The right-of-way team staff assists a lot with that. Steep slope stabilization and erosion control. So we do our best to identify areas that could be problematic and maintain our conveyance system in order to minimize this from happening. Obviously, we can't see everything coming, but we do our absolute best to be prepared for it or to mitigate illicit discharge detection and elimination. We know that as IDDE. Tom, you asked about this earlier. So we do get quite a few call-ins from our residents, which is very helpful because ultimately what we're trying to do is prevent this from occurring. That's kind of the whole point of this permit. We have a system in which we report it, we document it, we report it to the Department of Ecology. We reported 19 of these in 2020. And as Hannah mentioned, we also are able to detect some of these just through our normal routine duties as far as inspections with catch basins and outfalls. This slide shows how much of our infrastructure that we have video on. So the purpose of this slide is to try to kind of convey the vast system that we have. This is our infrastructure. This is how much in the past 5 years we've been able to capture video on. So in order to capture video, you need to have a clean, accessible pipe. And a lot of times we don't. So at least accessible for a camera. So sometimes this requires, cleaning the pipe. Sometimes it requires a camera truck to be on standby while the pipe is cleaned, and then they get the camera down and they say, oh, it's not quite clean, we can only go this far. And then the jet truck has to come back up. So it can be cumbersome, but this is what we've managed to compile so far. And as Hannah mentioned, we would eventually like to reach our goal of getting the entire system blanketed in a 6-year cycle. And we do this in partnership with one of our contractors that we use for the Vector and jetting and camera services. Now we'll talk a little bit about the staff that actually does this work. I mentioned we do it in concert with a contractor because we're a little light on field staff. We have one full-time employee that is funded for stormwater. That's me. And also I want to talk about Hannah, who just does a mountain of work for this permit. I mean, she does so much in documenting what we do as part of our reporting in order to maintain our compliance with this permit. So we really couldn't do it without her. And she's funded part-time for this role. So as I mentioned, I'm on the right-of-way team. So the right-of-way staff assists when they're available or when we coordinate and schedule when we have big projects, or if we have storms that are coming, we know we're going to need help. And then I already mentioned our contracting services and equipment. We don't have our own Vector or TV truck. That's all part of the contract that we use. And then one other thing that I haven't talked about is sometimes the right-of-way staff and myself will assist with CIP projects in some of the water courses and things like that. And the individual who takes the lead on that is Fred Gu. He's our capital project manager, and he'll go more into depth on those.
All right, thank you, Chris, and good evening. So,
Fred, can I stop you for a sec?
Yeah, sure.
Councilman Mandel, you had a question?
Yeah, I remembered to raise my hand, but I didn't remember to unmute. So you said we don't have a Vector truck for the stormwater, but we do for other functions, don't we? For the sewer? Not sure. And I was just kind of wondering, is it worth looking into whether purchasing our own would be financially advantageous?
Great question, Councilmember Andrel. So we do have a vac truck on the sewer side of the house. However, I think a key element of what you're hearing tonight is it's important to keep the sewer and the storm separate. The sewer team, has additional resources that man that truck, and they're focused on the sewer system. As far as the sewer requirements, we're required to go through our entire sewer system once every 5 years, and so it's a pretty robust schedule and pretty tight time frame to get that work done. So due to the number of staff resources we have within the right-of-way and stormwater team, at this point in time, it's been easier to contract out that work for the stormwater side of the house. However, that might be something we look at in the future. We did just recently convert the sewer side to bring that resource in, those resources in-house, but we did staff up on the sewer side first. We added 2 new FTEs to sort of help with that workload along the way. So that might be a future consideration. I think it's an important piece to continue to look at as we move forward.
Thanks, Jason.
Okay, thank you. Fred, back to
Right.
you.
Back to the presentation. Great. So the related projects are water course stabilization projects. So the city has water courses that are natural stream channels. Some are perennial, some are seasonal. That means some of them actually come from natural spring and then pick up runoff from the drainage system and then dump into water course and then go to the lake. And then some water courses are seasonal. That means it only flows when there's heavy rains. And they receive stormwater runoff from drainage system upstream, and then it flows through the water courses before releasing into the Lake Washington. So during high flow events, the velocity of the water can create down-cutting energy so great that it incites into the streambed materials and the banks, and therefore creating sediment erosions. And why is sediment erosion so important? Because NPDES views sediment as pollution. And what it means by that is that the sediment can suffocate fish, and it can kill their eggs, and it disturb their habitats. And study also finds that sediment could absorb heat from the sun and increases the water temperatures. So by doing so, the oxygen level become depleted. So it's no good for the fish. So the city implements water course stabilization projects to reduce erosions and sediment transport to the Lake Washington. So next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So there are a couple examples I want to show you. Pictures on the left are 2 examples of water course projects that we did in the past. On the top, you see a 10-foot head cut. And this has to do with the lack of a good transition from the top of the bank to the bottom. Or perhaps a pipe was there at one point, but it got washed away. So that's one example. And the project on the bottom is known to be that channel is known to have a soft stream bed, and the bank is highly erodible. So to tackle those projects, first of all, we have to recognize that the water courses are also protected critical areas. But if you live next to a water course, you would know that there's a buffer zone that you cannot build to it. So that's something that we have to keep in mind too when we implement our projects. So the solution to the projects are usually by the use of natural materials like stream rocks and logs, as you can see on the pictures on the left-hand side. And however, piping could also be a good solution, but lately it hasn't been allowed by Fish and Wildlife, but in the past, with certain special circumstances, it were allowed before. So I'm not throwing out the possibility of future piping if there's extreme examples like really steep slope, and that piping is the only way to implement such projects. So, and also that to mitigate construction actions in the watercourse, which is again a critical area, we oftentimes we have to provide invasive removals and replanting with natural plants within the project limits, just to establish a reporting corridors. So, so this kind of projects are not, as you can see, it's not your typical, public work projects, and they usually have come with other obstacles too, and they're usually very difficult to access. As you can imagine, in the project on the lower left, it was 80 feet below street level in a steep ravine next to Shorewood apartment. So to implement those kind of projects, we have to, I think the contractor used high wires, high lining all the logs into the stream and actually construct the stream with hand tools. So, and also to get these projects permitted, it takes a long time. And there are two agencies that not usually, but they have jurisdiction over projects like that on the island. One is the Army Corps of Engineers, and the other one is Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And the Corps of Engineers usually takes a very long time for them to review the project and eventually approving it. And the longest time I have ever gotten a approved project from them was like 14 months. And the last one took about 7 months. So planning ahead is the key to tackle these projects. And because of the uniqueness of this kind of projects, there are not a whole lot of contractors out there that would bid on it. And even when we put it out to bid, if we get 3 bids, that would make my day. I see my colleagues who would do other public work projects that get 7 or 8 bids, and I got 3 and sometimes 2. So, so to implement this kind of projects, some added benefits would be besides reducing erosions and sediment transport to the lake, these kind of projects also sometimes protect infrastructures and like roadways and underground utilities. It's not showing on the picture on the upper left-hand side, but there is a sewer main running 5 feet beyond that head cut. So if you can imagine, if that head cut is not fixed, it's not stabilized, it will continue to move upstream and exposing the sewer main. So, so for that, so while we implement CIP projects, and private development continues, and new houses are being built and sites are being redeveloped, and those actions can add additional loads to the drainage system. So next, we have Wuji Dane, our senior development engineer, who can talk about mitigation requirements for the private development side of things. So Wuji.
Oh, thank you, Fred.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm Ruji Ding, Senior Development Engineer with City for a long time. I'm mainly working on the private development related projects and the permits. So I'm just going to talk about stormwater requirement for the private development projects related to new homes and major remodels. It's very personal for the regular homeowners. So like Hannah was talking about, NPDES permit established requirements to mitigate the stormwater runoffs from the private development projects, like new homes and even town center projects. So those projects create a new impervious surface, like new driveways, added roof, added walkways. They will create the runoffs, and those projects will require mitigations. So the requirements were adopted in the city code on July 2018. So any permits they apply after July 2018 will have to meet this new code. There are quite a bit mitigation measurement for the requirements. I'm just going to talk about 3 most common ones we use in Mercer Island. So the most common ones we use is a detention system. So a detention system typically is a large pipe with about 36-inch to 6-inch diameter, depend on the lot size. They are buried under either side yard, backyard, sometimes under the driveway, depends on the house configuration, lot configurations. So the picture on the right, it's a detention pipe about for 6 homes. So you imagine one home is about 1/5 the size. So the function of detention system will make the rainfall, temporarily store the rainfall, then drain out slowly over the time. So drain slowly over the time will reduce the high flows during the rainfall and not overwhelming the stream below. Just like Fred talked about what Fred's working on, try to prevent the erosion of the stream. So in this Mercer Island last few years, about 60% of new homes or major remodel will require to have this type of detention system. So that really helps the stream protection. So that is the second mitigation measurement we use is a low impact development. I think Ross discussed a little bit about it. But the basic concept for this technique is to keep the rainfall on site by using natural process. So most technique we're using here in Mercer Island are infiltration system and the rain gardens. So on the picture on the bottom, so on the left, that is a typical infiltration system. On the left, so the contractor dug down a trench. It's deep enough to hit the sandy soil below. Then after they hit sandy soils, and then they put a gravel and the pipe was a perforated pipe with holes in there. So then roof drain and the drywall drain will connect to that pipe and slowly seep the water out from holes into gravel that eventually go to the sandy soil below. But the one issue is you need to have good sandy soil in able to infiltrate well. So if it's not, it's a clay, it's water just gonna sit there, it's not going down.
Hey, Ruchi, we have a question from council member.
Right.
Yeah, hi, Ruchi. Thanks for this presentation. Hey, so is there a way for an inexpensive way for the homeowner or landowner to know whether this is going to be suitable before the excavation? Because if it's only going to work 10% of the time, we shouldn't have people digging huge holes only to find out it's not viable.
So we have a website. We have a layer. If you put an address in there, it will tell you that site is suitable or not. But we have time later on, I can show you how to find it. Yes, we do. We just implemented last year. So it's a lot of work for our GIS department to do it, but yes, it does. So normally—
I just wanted to add to that
yeah.
really briefly. When we were updating our stormwater regulations, I think back in 2018 or so, as a requirement of our NPDES permit, we knew that we were going to have all of these updated stormwater requirements, and we knew that most of the soils on Mercer Island were not good, and we wanted to find a convenient way, a low-cost way for people to figure out whether or not infiltration, low-impact development, if those techniques were viable or not on their site or in their neighborhood. So what Ruji was talking about is that we have a map that shows areas where they are more suitable for infiltration, meaning the soils are sandier. And like Ruji mentioned, about 90% of Mercer Island is not that way. Most of it's clay.
Okay, thanks. That's great information. Appreciate it.
Brian?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask about the detention pipe system. You showed an example in the picture that was for an installation for 6 homes, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a smaller size for a single home if somebody was remodeling substantially an existing facility, or is that the same size?
The size, it's based on the added impervious surface area.
Okay.
So give you an idea. So if a home has 3,000 square foot
Yeah.
impervious surface roof area, so you're using 36-inch pipe, it's about 40 foot long.
Mhm.
So
What? Okay.
yeah.
What? Just a ballpark, roughly. What does something like that cost a homeowner to install? And I'm not asking this because I oppose the policy or anything. I'm just curious.
It varies. So somewhere between 20,000 to 30,000, I would think that's what a contract is telling me.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it varies, really depends who. Now, normally you can get bids. They have different prices.
Okay, Ruji, back
Yeah.
to the normally scheduled program.
Thank you. So that's the infiltration, the second round. The third most common ones we use, not most common, the last mitigation measure I want to talk about is for the after construction. So we call the post-soil, post-control soil management. That's the only measurement we require for when the house is complete. So we require to have a 12-inch deep, healthy, good soil and a mix. And we import basically we import 8-inch good soil and mix it with 4-inch native soil. So we have 12-inch deep good soil. Then if you have a planting bed, you add a 2-inch mulch on top. So on the picture on the right, it's the soil they brought in 8-inch, then mixed up with 4-inch. And the bottom, it's after it's done, they plant it. So the homeowners really like it. I got lots of compliment from homeowners. They said they make them yard looks nice and the plant healthier, and they don't really need a lot of irrigation and there's chemicals for the lawn to remove the weeds. So it's a very good soil but it costs a little bit more in the beginning, but long run it will save money. But we do inspect those and make sure it's in and once the house is done, they are installed the way we want it. So the last one, the city does provide education resources to the customers. So when the city hall was open, we have a printout handout. When the customer comes, we provide them. So now when customer asks, I provide them website. We have website with tip sheets for the homeowners, and then we have more detailed design guideline for the professionals like engineers, architects, so they know what need to be shown on the plan. So the last one, we do have a city in the active web maps, like Council Lisa was asking about it. So that map shows utilities, aerial photos, soil conditions, and if you type the address, and it will tells you if there's storm system near your house, or if the good soil is good for the infiltration, do the LID measurements. So that's the map. It's on the public website, so anybody can access it. It's very helpful. I hear lots from homeowners, architects. It's really helped them to save money because they don't have to hire geotech to say if it can be infiltrated or not. So yeah.
And I think with that, you all have just received a tremendous amount of information from a lot of different portions of the staff. And I think you have a great cross section here of all the staff that touches NPDES from different aspects. And I think now would be a great time to just open it up to any questions. I'll invite staff to turn your cameras on, and we can just get started.
Great. Well, thank you. That was a great presentation from the Public Works staff, appreciate that. And it looks like the council member has another question.
Well, I just wanted to make a comment, and I thought, I apologize. I thought this meeting only lasted till 6:30. So this is great that you got through the entire presentation. And I want to mention every one of your names, but I'm afraid I will miss one of them. But Patrick, you and your team have done an outstanding job. This is super informative. I look forward to picking up a copy of this presentation, sending it to the full council, because I know they'll be super interested in it. One of the comments I hear the most from citizens is infrastructure. They really care about water and sewer and stormwater and maintaining the streets and those critical infrastructure components. And so having broader depth of knowledge because of presentations like this really helps me to do my job. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, council member. Brian? Brian, you're on mute.
I just echo what Lisa said, and thank you for the presentation. I do have one observation, which is that there were some photographs that had various staff, but I didn't notice Jason in any of the photographs. So I think in future presentations, it would be helpful to have some sort of visual proof that he's out in the field getting his job done.
I'll let him borrow my waders.
We do have a represented workforce, Board Member Thomas, and so I have to be very careful, what field work I do or don't do to make sure I don't violate any union policies along the way.
I'm sure.
I'll take a picture of him at his desk. Yeah.
Board members, any other questions or comments? I do have the one question on, have we had any, I assume this all goes into Department of Ecology and reports of spills and illicit dumping and leaks. Have we ever been fined?
Not to my recollection. I'm looking at Brian and Patrick, and they're both shaking their head no.
No,
I believe so.
Not that I'm aware of.
And if
Looks like we might have lost Tom.
We'll give him a few minutes to reconnect. Just didn't know if that was my computer or someone else's computer. As Tom reconnects, are there any other questions from? Oh,
yeah. While we're waiting for Tom to come back on, I have a question for Ruji. I've seen a lot of the detention vaults going in. There must be quite a few houses now. So, how do you see when those are becoming effective? Do you notice a decrease in outfall, or an increase in lake wash and water quality, or fry runs, or more orcas or something? How do you know when those are being successful?
So the most common I got is from our building official, Don Cole. He's telling me he has seen a lot less landslides, a lot more less. He told me those detention really works from his point of view. It's much less landslides. And that's one. The other, I believe, is a water course below where Fred's working on it. So if Fred can see once he get a water course established, so we see much less erosion, slower erosions.
Right, we have been fixing water courses actively for the past 12, 15 years. And every 2 years, we do a water course assessment. And the last two that we got, meaning in the past 2 to 5 years, there was no major new discoveries of high level erosion from particular water course.
These are just the evidence, yeah.
And then I guess follow-up question, that's the private side. On the public side for Mercer Island, are we doing anything to mitigate, the tremendous amount of stormwater that comes off our streets? So adding vaults under our roads or anything similar?
On the water quantity side, we're not doing so much, but on the water quality side, we are. Those are the kinds of things that Brian or Chris was talking about. Street sweeping. He shared about why it's important, but I wanted to add a little bit more to what he was saying. It's not just about like sweeping up leaves in the fall when there's leaves all over the place, but when you think about what happens on our roads, there are cars and trucks driving on our roads every day, dripping oil, fine metallic particles from brake linings, all of those kinds of things, and even the rubber that wears off of the tires. Those are all pollutants that are mostly particulates that are just laying on the street, and unless we are sweeping them up or doing something before all of those things get into the drainage system, it's all eventually getting to Lake Washington. So our focus has been primarily on the water quality side and a little less so on the water quantity side. And for a couple of reasons. One reason is that it's not a requirement to retrofit existing roadways. It's very costly to do so. And in order to do it, you need a lot of real estate in the right place. The right place usually is on the low end of whatever is draining. And a lot of times, or most of the time, there just is not space in the right of way. So if there's not space in the right of way, we're looking at private property, acquisition of private properties. And I think you all know what the property values are like on Mercer Island. A little bit more expensive than a lot of other communities around. So that's kind of a short answer.
And we also do add structures, like control structures, so that can affect the flow rate. So we're not reducing the quantity, but we can reduce the rate that it flows. So we've done that as a maintenance and operation department pretty extensively. It also increases water quality. Can help reduce the sediments.
To Brian's point too, the other piece I'll add is we are inspecting these basins and infrastructure. I believe we have to inspect our catch basins, the entire system on a 2-year cycle. So we're inspecting 50% of it in year 1 and the other 50% in year 2. And that inspection is also identifying whether or not those basins need to be cleaned out or repaired, the debris sucked out of them as well. So it's part of our comprehensive O&M cycle.
Would also add, there are projects that come up on public lands, like in parks, street end parks, and areas like that. And when we have the chance, we're actually working on putting in small detention facilities within those as parts of those projects, actively slowing flow through those areas so that we can, just try and filter out as much as possible within those projects. So we're always looking for opportunities to capture stormwater and slow it down, integrated into those capital projects.
One such project, I think, is down at Calkins Landing, which was completed 3 or 4 or 5 years ago.
My favorite is Northwood.
Mm-hmm.
That is a combination of the detention and the infiltration. It's a Northwood Elementary School. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a combination. Mm-hmm. Works really well.
It's a very large facility, and they were very fortunate that there's a very significant sand layer in that school area. So they had to dig down quite a ways, but once they hit the sand, it was very effective.
Yeah. They dig down 17 feet, I believe. Mm-hmm.
Tom, you are muted.
Can you hear me now? My internet is unstable.
Well, we'll work on that.
So I don't know where we are. Are we still in questions?
Yes, we are.
Any other questions on the NPDES presentation? Awesome. Well, thank you. It was a great presentation. I appreciate you spending your evening with us, getting us educated. It's great information. Thank you.
Thanks very much. It was our pleasure.
All right. Down to the last items of business. I think the next one is Jason, your update on anything?
Yeah, I'll be very brief. So just a reminder to the board, we have our next meeting on May 11th. And at that meeting, we will have the draft risk and resiliency plan that we've talked about a couple of times. Rona Land, our utilities engineer, will be with us, and a consultant to help us walk through hopefully that draft report, which is due at the end of June. So we're getting near to getting that project complete. The other piece I'll just share is our department continues to go through hiring phase. We continue to recruit and look for some open positions. We've had staff move internally. Chris Kelly is a great example tonight. He has actually moved over from a CRT position into the stormwater crew lead. And so there's always a backfill or a ripple effect that goes along with that. So we're still trying to get our staff up to full speed. Hopefully in the next month or two, we'll be at full capacity, and you'll see some more faces with the board with future projects down the road. So that's it from the Public Works Department, and all for my report tonight.
Thanks, Jason. Anything, other business from the board members? Anybody else? Brian, you usually have something to add.
Well, I got my my little King County sewer upgrade mailer, and I actually thought it was pretty good. So there's my contribution to the meeting this evening.
That was a well done. Was a well done mailer. Okay. Well, no other business. It is 6:36, and we are adjourned. Thank you. And just a reminder, stay on until the Zoom call ends. Thank you.